We're going to start at the bad jobs and work our way to the worst of the worst. Food poison tester. Food poison testers served kings, emperors, and nobles throughout ancient and medieval history, especially in royal courts of ancient Rome, China, and medieval France. Because assassination by poison was a constant fear among rulers, these testers sampled meals, wine, medicine, and sauces before they reached the royal table. They would then wait to see whether symptoms appeared before the ruler ate. Although some poison testers were trusted servants or even slaves, the position could be deadly if an assassination attempt occurred. At the same time, proximity to rulers sometimes gave testers unusual political influence and access to royal courts. Fear of poisoning became so common in certain courts that elaborate tasting ceremonies developed around royal meals. Sin Eater. A sin eater was a person hired to perform a strange funeral ritual in parts of Wales and Western England between roughly the 1600s and early 1900s. During the ceremony, bread or food was placed on the chest of a deceased person, and the sin eater would consume it to symbolically take on the dead person's sins so the soul could enter heaven peacefully. Although some communities quietly relied on them, sin eaters were heavily feared and socially isolated because people believed they carried the spiritual corruption of the dead. Many lived on the fringes of society and were treated as outcasts despite providing what was considered an important religious service. Some families secretly hired them at night to avoid public shame. Barber surgeons. Barber surgeons were medical practitioners in medieval and early modern Europe who combined basic surgery with the everyday work of barbers. In addition to cutting hair and shaving beards, they performed procedures such as bloodletting, tooth extractions, amputations, wound treatment, and draining infections. Their shops were easy to recognize because of the red and white barber pole, which symbolized blood and bandages from bloodletting procedures. Although they provided important medical care for ordinary people and soldiers, operations were extremely painful and dangerous because anesthesia and modern sanitation did not yet exist. Patients frequently died from infection after even minor procedures, and barber surgeons often worked in filthy conditions with unsterilized tools. During wars and epidemics, however, they became essential because they were among the few people willing and able to perform emergency surgeries quickly. Corpse road carrier. Before organized funeral transport systems existed, corpse road carriers transported dead bodies across long distances to churches or burial grounds, especially in rural parts of medieval England and Scotland. These journeys could take days and often followed isolated paths known as corpse roads. Carriers faced constant exposure to disease and decomposition, while also dealing with harsh weather, wild animals, and the threat of robbery. Because death was surrounded by superstition, some carriers were feared by villagers or even accused of witchcraft or grave robbing. The job was physically exhausting and emotionally disturbing, especially during periods of famine or epidemic when deaths increased dramatically. In some regions, people believed evil spirits traveled along corpse roads, causing locals to avoid them entirely after dark. Roman latrine sponge bearer. In ancient Roman Empire public bathhouses and toilets, workers were responsible for maintaining shared hygiene tools called tersoria. These workers cleaned the sponges in buckets of salt water or vinegar and managed sewage systems beneath crowded public latrines. This was considered one of the filthiest and most hazardous jobs in Roman urban life. Public toilets were often busy social spaces where people gathered to talk business and politics, meaning these workers had to maintain sanitation in extremely crowded conditions. Historians also believe outbreaks of disease spread more easily because dozens of people reused the same cleaning sponge every day. Gong farmer. A gong farmer was a medieval sanitation worker in England during roughly the 1300s to 1600s. Gong farmers were hired to empty cesspits and remove human waste from beneath buildings. Because of the unbearable smell and health risks, they usually worked only at night and were legally restricted from appearing during daytime in some cities. Workers climbed directly into pits filled with waste, where they risked drowning, suffocation from methane fumes, and deadly infections. Despite the horrifying conditions, gong farmers were often paid relatively well because almost nobody else would do the work, making it one of the few dirty jobs that could provide a decent income. The waste they collected was sometimes sold as fertilizer to farmers, meaning human waste unexpectedly became part of the agricultural economy. Some gong farmers became surprisingly wealthy compared to other laborers, though they were still looked down upon socially. Chimney sweepers. In the 1700s and 1800s, chimney sweeping became one of the harshest child labor jobs in England and other parts of Europe. Small children known as climbing boys were forced to crawl through narrow chimneys to scrape away dangerous soot buildup that could cause fires. Many were orphaned, sold by poor families, or trapped in abusive apprenticeships. The work exposed children to suffocation, burns, toxic soot inhalation, and falls from rooftops. Some became permanently deformed from climbing in cramped spaces, and many developed a rare cancer later called chimney sweeps carcinoma. Public outrage eventually led to labor reforms and laws restricting the use of child chimney sweeps. Body collector. During plagues. During devastating disease outbreaks such as the Plague of Justinian in the 500s and the Black Death in the 1300s, cities hired workers to remove corpses from homes and streets. These body collectors operated during times of extreme panic when normal burial systems collapsed under the sheer number of deaths. Workers hauled bodies into carts, transported them to mass graves, and often handled victims without protective equipment or medical understanding of disease. They constantly faced exposure to infection, violent crowds, psychological trauma, and the horrifying sight of overflowing burial pits. In many plague-stricken cities, the work became so dangerous that authorities offered unusually high wages to convince people to do it. Many workers themselves eventually died from the diseases they were exposed to every day.